Hi, what do I do for a living? Well, maybe you don't care, but if you do, it's in this video. Hi, my name's Andy and this is the Q4 channel. So, what do I do for a living? Well, I've alluded to it a few times. I've said in other videos that my job is driver based. But what kind of driving? But before we get into that, let's have a little humour. So there's this gynecologist and he's really burnt out with his job. The stress of the work, the workload itself, and the fact that he has to carry all of this insurance in case, with him being tired, he makes a mistake. And he has to carry this insurance for liability. He's just fed up, he's just burnt out. So he goes searching around for a different career and he notices a night school's doing mechanical courses. So he thinks, yeah, complete change of pace, I'll become a car mechanic. So he does, he spends the next 18 months learning as much as he can about the mechanics of cars at night school, and it comes to the exam and he's nervous like the rest of the would-be mechanics, and he does his exam and then he's nervously waiting for the results, and they come through the post and he's more than pleased because it says he's got a distinction. But the bit that baffles him, it says 150% pass rate. He thinks, well, that can't be right. So he rings up the examiner and he says, I'm really pleased about the distinction, but 150% pass rate, it's got to be a typo, hasn't it? He says, 100% is the most you can get. And the examiner says, well, let me explain it to you. The exam's cut into two parts, as you know, you took the exam. It says the first part, which is worth 50% if you do it perfectly, is to dismantle the whole engine down to its component parts. He said, and you did that perfectly. He says, you got the full 50%. He said, you did it perfectly, didn't make a mistake, you didn't round out a nut head. He said, it was beautiful, your work was. He says, well, thanks very much. Says the second part, he said, as you know, was to rebuild the engine using all of the component parts after you'd dismantled it. He says, and you did that perfectly. There wasn't a nut out of place, there wasn't a torque, hadn't been torqued properly, there wasn't a hose loose, everything, wires, he said it was all perfect, and you got the full 50% for the second part of the test. And he says, yeah, I understand that. He said, but you did something so unusual that I've never seen in my 30 years as an examiner, is why you got that 50% bonus. And he goes, oh right, what was that? He said, you did it all through the exhaust. So, what do I do for a job? I drive. My living is driving. But what kind of driving? Taxi driver? HGV driver? Limousine driver? Stunt driver? Maybe I'm a driving instructor. No, I'm not. I'm a test driver. That means I test drive prototype cars for the car industry. You've probably heard of Test Pilot. They do the same thing but with planes. They test development planes for the aviation industry. Well, test drivers test drive prototype cars for the car industry. That's what we do. Now you're thinking, well, what type of cars? Well, I do all sorts of cars, from the everyday, the sort of thing that you see every day on the road, the sort of thing that you and I buy that we can afford. I also do luxury vehicles, I do high-end luxury vehicles, and I think you know the brands I'm talking about. I also do supercars and one or two hypercars. Also do vans. I don't do motorcycles and I don't do HGVs. Although we do have testers that work for us that do those things, but you need a different license for those jobs and I just don't have them. So I test cars and up to 7.5 ton vehicles. I've been doing this job now for 19 years and I have to say it's been a pretty good 19 years. I really love my job because no 2 days are the same. But it comes with a hell of a lot of responsibility, does this job. You see, car manufacturers take quite a long time to develop a new car. It can be 18 months, 2 years, 5 years, from development of a concept on the drawing board to a physical vehicle. It can be anything, well, any number of years, but let's say 2 to 5 years. Now, in that time, all of the research and development money is in that prototype, that first built car. Now, they may make a dozen copies of that first built car or 20 copies, but all of the millions that they've taken in developing new body panels, new interiors, everything, or the electrics, the new engine maybe, as much as it's cost them, and it will be millions, is in that prototype. So every time I get into a new prototype, I have it front and centre of my mind. This vehicle is worth millions of pounds. Even if it's only a few £1,000s or a couple of tens of thousands of pounds, once it's on the forecourt for sale. At the moment of my testing it, it's worth millions, because all of the hopes and expectations of the car company and the designers and the engineers, all of the research and development lies in that vehicle. So one really important thing that you remember as a test driver is keep it shiny side up. If for some unknown reason you find that you've got 4 rubber wheels pointing to the sky and the view out of the windscreen has become very Australian, you got it wrong. You got it badly wrong. And I can guarantee people will get very shouty with you, because they want to know why you got it wrong. That prototype is worth a lot of money. But it's great fun, my job. It really is great fun. I'm driving cars that the general public are not going to see for maybe 2 years, especially if I've been brought in early in the prototype, not later when it's pre-launch or pre-launch. But you still get your hands on vehicles that other people aren't going to see for a long time. And because I've been doing this for 19 years, I've seen a heck of a lot of changes in the car industry. I saw the rise of the hybrid, I've seen the rise of the electric vehicle, and I've tested both of those. I've seen the rise now of the autonomous vehicle, or should I say systems that are being used to bring in the autonomous vehicle. There are certain companies that are trying to jump straight to full autonomous. A lot of the bigger car companies are doing it in stages and steps, slowly removing the driver from the drive and letting the car do more. Now, in my experience, or should I say my opinion, I think it's one of the contributors in the last 20 years for people's driving to become less than stellar, shall we say. The more the car does, the more people rely on the car instead of doing what they are doing, which is driving a car. And therefore I think people become a little more distracted on the roads, shall we say. But yeah, so I've seen a lot in the last nearly 20 years as a driver, as a test driver, and because I've seen so much and are so closely involved in test driving, future videos that I'm going to be putting out about cars or things that you shouldn't do or should do have come from that experience as a test driver, because I test both on the road and also on the tracks. Sometimes I can go weeks and weeks without seeing a track, and other times I can see months without seeing the road with the test vehicle. And that's another thing as well. The test vehicles tend to go out with what we call camouflage on them. They're called decal stickers. And these are usually geometric shapes, black and white, or swirls, or whatever, all over the vehicle. It hides the shape of the vehicle. Unfortunately, it does make you stand out on the roads. So if you get a certain type of person, the amount of photos I must appear in of people who on motorways and on A roads, I look in my rearview mirror and I can see the person looking out the window like, what is it? And the passenger, male or female, with a camera out taking video or photos. I've even had people literally circling around me on a motorway, coming racing up behind me, then moving out to the middle lane, going past me to get a front shot, and then braking. And I'm thinking, you do realise what you're doing on the road right now. But there's nothing we can do. You're on public road, so therefore you're pretty much public property. The amount of times I've been stopped by the police, well, you can imagine it's a few. Because the police, just like the general public, are nosy. They want to know what it is. I was driving through a town in the middle of the night when I got pulled over by an armed response unit. I thought, what on earth have I done wrong? So I got out of the vehicle and locked it as the police officer ran past me to the front of the vehicle, then looked at me and went, "What is it?" I went, "I can't tell you." He goes, "Oh, come on, I won't tell anybody." I said, "You've got to be joking. You lot are the biggest blabbermouths out there. I'll do you a deal. If you can guess what brand of vehicle it is, I'll tell you if you're right or not." And he guessed several vehicles and he didn't get it right. Or maybe he did and I just told him he hadn't. Because it's not my job to tell him what the vehicle is. The vehicle manufacturers have gone to a lot of effort to de-brand the prototype. There's no badges on it, nothing on the steering wheel. Even the window etchings are blacked out so that you can't see, one, what vehicle it is, and two, what brand it is. Because the vehicle manufacturers want that wow factor when they reveal it at some beautiful car show in front of everybody, and especially in front of the press. They want to say, "See what we've done." And they don't want that leaked out by people taking photos. So hence the camouflaging, hence the decals and such like, and hence the blackout of all brand names that will be on the vehicle, badges if you like. They want to keep it secret until they're ready to release it, until it's their time frame. They also don't want their opponents to know that they're maybe moving in a different direction that'll keep them on the hop. And let's be honest, what Jaguar Land Rover did when they brought the XF out really brought a wide-eyed amazement from Audi, BMW, Mercedes. They went, "Jaguar? They make old people's cars, don't they?" And then they brought this XF out and it was just, wow, that's not an old person's car. And it was a luxury vehicle. And look where they've built from that first launch. They're once again a world player to be reckoned with. And they really did keep those other luxury brands on the hop. So that's why they want to keep things quiet. All car companies. That's why we have to be super secret. I don't really talk to my friends about what I do. They know that I'm a test driver, but I don't really tell them what I'm testing at the moment, what type of test I'm doing. I talk in generalities, just as I am now, broad stroke sort of things that tell you that cars need to be tested. What we do is a legal requirement for the car companies. They have to go through certain jump through hoops, shall we say, so that they can get an accreditation, which means that they can then sell it to the general public, to you and me. If they don't pass these things, there's something wrong with the vehicle. That's how important my job is, and the work of my colleagues, is that we're doing this work. But the engineers who develop that vehicle, they don't want it to let it go to a virtual stranger like me. They're millions of pounds worth of research and development to give me the keys to drive it and then say, "Oh, it's rubbish." You know, they're literally, it's like an exam. They're waiting for the results, just like that gynecologist was. You know, they're waiting for, oh, is it going to be all right? Is everything going to stand up? Have we done a good enough job? So when I write my reports, I like to do what, and you might like to do this as well if you work in any kind of business where you're given a report. I like to do what I call a bad news sandwich. So I'll start with something I like about the vehicle. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be something small, it could be something huge. This car handles like a dream. It's like I'm sitting on clouds. Or it could be, I like the stereo. Whatever. Start with something positive and something nice about the vehicle. Then, the meat of the sandwich, you list all of the things that are not right yet. Because an early prototype, you very rarely get and everything's wrong. It will have a multitude of things wrong. And the engineers know this and the car manufacturers know this. They're starting and they know where they're started. It's not the finished product. It'll go through many changes before it gets to the finished product. In fact, an early prototype, it's probably not even got the right body on it. It's probably a cut and shut, just to give it an approximated size and shape that the vehicle will be when finished. So they're not expecting the car to be perfect, they're expecting some criticism. So I list all of those things that I've found with it, and my colleagues who will also drive the vehicle may find other things. That's why we will have several or many testers on the same vehicle so that you get many perspectives. But usually the major things we're all picking up on, so that they know they're the things to concentrate on. The lesser things are niggles that they will get round to before the vehicle's launch, but they need to do the major things first. So in this bad news sandwich, I then finish with something I like about the vehicle. Maybe it's got a really smooth gearbox or smooth gear change if it's an auto. Maybe it handles beautifully. Maybe I don't know, maybe it's just got a great seat in it. But you finish with something positive. That way, they're not getting a diatribe of just horror stories of their vehicle. They've not got an engineer with his head in his hands thinking, I've created a lemon. It's horrible, nobody likes it. No, a bad news sandwich. And why a bad news sandwich? You may think, well, surely that's a good news sandwich. No. A sandwich is always defined by what the filling is, not by the bread. Otherwise, I've got a bread sandwich, 2 slices of ham with a piece of bread in between. It's always what's between. So the good news, the real meat is but also the good news is finishing them on a high, starting them on a high, and then telling them all of the things that is wrong with their vehicle. So that's what I do. Not all test drivers do what I do. In fact, maybe no other test driver does. But I just think to myself, if I was the engineer, I just wouldn't want to hear a complete list of horrible things that are wrong with something I've spent the last 2 years or 18 months slaving away to get to this point where he's given me the keys and said, now go and test it for me. So that's what I do. So that's my job. My job is, I'm a test driver. And I love my job. I get to drive vehicles that I could never afford. Unless I won the lottery or have a relative I didn't know existed who's a multi-millionaire. I've driven hypercars that I'm just like, wow. Just wow. I've driven the luxury brands that you go, oh, you can see why multi-millionaires get swanned around in these vehicles. You know, when you're driving one of those, and I think you know the brands I'm talking about, where the loudest thing in it is the clock, and that's digital. It's not even a tick clock, and it just feels like you're being transported from one place to the next in your bed with a duvet. It's so quiet, so smooth. But at the same time, if you put your welly on the loud pedal, it wakes up and it'll get you there quickly. So yeah, and supercars, you know, they're great fun to drive. I remember once I was testing with the manufacturer's engineer of this supercar. I won't give you the brand name because that wouldn't be fair. But he was a young guy, you know, fairly fresh out of university, bright ideas, bushy-tailed, full of enthusiasm. And he'd worked on this supercar, maybe in a minor role, but he was asked if he wanted to come and assist the test driver with the testing. He was going to be taking data and such like. And I turned to him, and he was a nice guy. And I said, so what do you think of it? And he went, oh, isn't it lovely? It looks great. And I said, yeah, it does. It looks the business. I said, so how have you enjoyed driving it? And he went, oh, I've never driven it. What? I've never driven it. I'm not allowed to. I said, you're kidding. You've spent all this time helping develop this vehicle and you've never driven it? And he goes, well, no, I'm not old enough. he wasn't old enough to be covered by the insurance to drive this supercar. And I felt really sorry for this guy, you know, all that time developing a vehicle and then never get listening to that engine note. You know, the kind of engine note when you turn the ignition and it comes with a deep growl, the sort of deep growl you get from the depth of a tiger's throat just before that growl ends up in your throat. That kind of growl. And I'm thinking, you hear all of this and see this and you've never got to drive it. So I tried to make his experience of being with the test driver as much fun as I could. And I said to him, well, shall we test the air brakes? And he went, well, it is down on the test procedure. So flappy paddle down to first gear, welly on the loud pedal, literally bellied it, balls out through the gears until I got to, should we say, a high speed? And then hard on the brakes. There comes the air brake up. And we've gone from being pushed into the back of the seat to noses on the windscreen. This guy's grin was so big, I thought the top of his head was going to fall off. If he'd have been a woman, I'd have gone, you've got lipstick on your ears, love. He was smiling that much. And he said, can we do it again? And I went, well, it's in the test. Because we were still doing the test. But you don't have to be too serious sometimes. You can enjoy your work without not doing what's expected of you. And I think that's a life lesson for anybody in their job. Even if you're doing something you don't particularly like, you can turn that around to being enjoying what you're doing. There are ways. So that's what I do as a test driver. If you found any of this informative, if you've liked what I've been saying to you, and also in future videos that I might be doing about driving, you know where my experience comes from now. I'm not just making this up. I have nearly 20 years of test driving experience. So if you liked it, leave a like. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, and a lot of people ask me the same, what's the best car you've ever driven? Well, that's an impossible thing to, that's an impossible thing to talk about. Because what kind of car are you talking about? What's the best 4x4 I've ever driven? Or what's the best people carrier I've ever driven? Or what's the best supercar I've ever driven? Or what's the best crossover vehicle I've ever driven? What's the best small hot hatchback I've ever driven? What's the best small family car I've ever driven? What's the best saloon I've ever driven? What's the best hypercar I've ever... You see, they're all different, and they do have a best, or they have a best that I've driven. So it's not a practical thing to answer. So instead of me answering what's the best car I've ever driven, how about I turn it on to you? What's the best car you've ever driven? Leave a comment down below, tell me what's the best and why. Why was it the best one? One of the most fun things I've ever tested was a sit-on lawnmower. You know, one of these big lawnmowers that they use on golf courses or the council use to trim the side of roads with the grass. I had great fun in the middle of winter in a foot of snow. I'm complete head to foot, wrapped up, crash helmet on, earbuds in, and I had great fun with it. It was a combination of the vehicle and the circumstances, because I was the only thing on the test track at the time because of the snow. No other vehicle could get out there and safely do any testing, but I could, and it was great fun. I had a wonderful time with it. Sit-on lawnmower, completely exposed to the elements. It was fantastic. So leave a comment, tell me, what is it and why is it the best thing that you've ever driven? Best car, best vehicle, whatever. Also, if you've enjoyed this and you think somebody else would enjoy it, share it. Okay? So, let's finish with a little humour. A chicken walks into a library, walks up to the librarian and goes, book. The librarian goes, pardon? The chicken goes, book. The librarian just picks up a random book and hands it to the chicken, sticks it under its wing and walks out the library. Next day it comes in and walks up to the librarian and goes, book, book. The librarian goes, sorry? He goes, book, book. He goes, 2 books, puts one under each wing, off it walks. Comes in the next day. By the end of a few days, it's just stood there going, "Bonk, bonk, 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 bonk," and it's just piling this chicken up with books, the librarian is. And he thinks, where the heck is this chicken going with these books? I've got to find out. So he quietly follows this chicken as it's staggering out of the library with all of these books on it. And it goes out the gate, goes down the road, and the librarian's following it, goes into a field, goes over this little rise, and at the other side of this little rise is a pond. And in the middle of this pond sits a big lily pad with a frog on it. The chicken staggers up to the edge of the pond, drops all these books, picks one up and goes, "Book!" And the frog goes, "Read it." Anyway, you people, stay healthy, stay happy, and above all, look after yourselves, because if you don't, who will? Goodbye now.
I'm a simple man.